Welcome to our podcast, We're Not So Different.
I'm Samira.
And I'm Ali. We're two professionals having real conversations about our experiences at home, work, and out in the community.
We tell our stories through the lens of our different backgrounds to just find out that we're not so different.
In our podcast, we'll explore ways that we can improve engagement and bridge social gaps while trying to find the humor in it all.
Check us out on social media at WNS Different or email us at wnsdifferent@gmail.com.
Today we're going to talk about what does it mean to be an American, or what is, as American as apple pie actually mean? So we're going to kind of try to hit on a couple of items, like what does it mean to be American, and is patriotism a real thing for immigrants and the descendants of slaves? Which is deep, that last part.
Yeah, it is.
So what does it mean to be American to you, Ali?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So as we talk about the descendants of slaves, I can say that that's definitely on my parents' side of the family. When I hear people say I'm an American, and one thing we'll probably touch on is when I've traveled internationally and people say, oh, you're American. It is a very weird thing to hear, especially growing up here, given the history of my people in this country. So
hold on. When you travel overseas, where was the last place you traveled?
Last place I was overseas was Colombia. Okay.
And when they said, oh, you're American, what was your initial feeling or reaction?
My initial reaction is always hesitation.
Why?
Because when I think about the idea of what it means to be American, I don't feel like that's me.
Okay, so what is that idea that you have?
So the idea that I have is, honestly, a white guy who has been here, his family has been here for 3 or 4 generations, right, or more, usually from Europe or someplace thereabouts. If their history goes back far enough, they're English or German or Northern European of some sort, right? And they grew up here and they've enjoyed every benefit, right? Whether it was the benefit of, other groups of people working for them, whether it's the benefit of just being, tall, blonde, and a handsome white man, and whatever I say happens. And, my father donated to XYZ school, and that's where I went, and I was on the water polo team. And now I'm
quote unquote was on the water polo team.
Right. I would say rowing, but that's not the proper term. Crew, right? I was on crew, right? So it's just the idea of being Caucasian, being fully accepted in society, being able to, the classic suburban, I can leave my front door open and nobody bothers me. I know the milkman, the mailman, the baker, the butcher, everyone else. Like, I am the idea of Western affluence and Western culture, right? So I listen to rock and roll, right, or soft rock, and I love 80s music, and my favorite, right? My favorite dish is tuna casserole, et cetera, right? It's just that it's that idea of your typical suburban family, right? And just being white and just saying like, hey, this is the country that we built, right? And to me, that's American, right? And whether that extends from an international perspective, whether that extends to the idea of how Americans are somewhat cocky, very sure of themselves, they experience a level of freedom, right? From a, quote unquote democracy, a level of freedom, being able to go anywhere they please, do anything they want. There is no real repercussion for that. And I think we've seen that instance all over the place. But the recent one that I love is where the guys were down in the Olympics in Brazil doing the fool at the gas station, and wreaked a whole bunch of havoc. And people were just like, oh, well, that's just
boys being boys.
Boys being boys, right? And that's and that'll be a whole another episode on what boys being boys means when white guys are doing some nonsense and when black guys are doing nonsense, right? We'll definitely have to cover that one because they're looked at two different things. But
yeah, absolutely.
Long answer to say that's in my head when they say American, that's what I think of, and that's definitely not me. It's not my experience. It's not the experience of my people. It's not even the experience of my people today, right? Even for those that achieve the highest office. That wasn't Obama's experience.
Oh,
right?
God,
they had caricatures of monkeys in national newspapers.
I mean,
right? You know what I mean?
The way they attacked the Obama family was ridiculous, especially like nothing makes it so blatantly, obviously hypocritical and racist than seeing how much they're praising the current family.
Oh yeah,
right? Like.
Yeah. The guy that's talking the most about... The
comparison between Michelle and Melania. Are you joking? Like,
even down to her she took her speech.
Right.
She took the Roman speech.
Yes. Oh my God. I thought she appropriated it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, like, it just, I could, like, my niece and her husband came to visit. They live in Germany. And, so it was interesting to hear their perspective of what's happening from what they had seen in media. And, they're very open-minded. They had their view, but they're very open-minded. So they were open to hearing other sides. And I was just like, it's just so interesting to me when people don't see the hypocrisy.
Right.
Like, wow, right. Michelle wore a sleeveless dress and all of a sudden she's, immodest and all of those negative words that they came up with that I would never use to describe such an amazing
black woman
being.
Excellence. Like they talk about black girl magic. That's black woman magic to the epitome. I mean, it's an absolute joke.
Okay. See, I was about to say, why limit her to just black girl magic? Because it's just like, she is just magical for everyone. But then I kind of felt like, am I making it sound, by saying that, am I making it seem like being
No, I don't think that at all. I think for us, and I know we're kind of delving a little bit, but I think for us, culturally, when we talk about, and we can actually tie this back, when people say American versus not, like, let's be clear, black people are not Americans. I know people are going to have a huge problem with that statement. We are not. We were not brought here to be American. Let's be clear. As much as people want to say things have changed, listen, if you dig up any former president, any former politician, any former leader that was Caucasian before black folks were freed, they would look at me and say, what are you doing not picking cotton? So when people like to make the argument that, well, that wasn't the intent of the Constitution, that wasn't the intent.
Sure.
I agree with you. I disagree 100%. The foundation of this country was never about treating black folks as equal. Period. Done in the story. It was never designed that way.
I agree.
Right?
And as a mother of young black boys, young men, and just hearing what they're saying, they're hungry to get past that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're like, yes, we know. And what can we do to just get past that? Like, what do we need to do to be there? So that's a whole other conversation, which I'd like to have with you.
We can definitely pick up on that one.
But
to your point about the American piece, I don't want to speak for all of us. I don't,
sure.
And some people that I know don't feel American. So when someone says you're American, my first reaction is hesitation.
What do you think I am? What would you consider me? Would you consider me American?
When I don't think about you as American. It's funny. I don't think about anybody who's not white as American.
Okay, I'm the same way. Isn't that?
You know what I mean? Like,
that's interesting.
But to me, it's not weird because it's saying you're assigning a definition to something that you built. Mm-hmm. If you are not the person that built it, why would you naturally feel that way? I didn't build the country or the system. So why would I feel like something another group of people says that, like, if you go talk to white folks, not all of them, but some of them say, they will proudly say, we built this country. Obviously not by their hands because somebody else is doing the work. No, let's be clear about that. Let's be clear. However, they say we built this country, and they are proud of our country.
And
we have the greatest country in the world, and they don't blink when it comes to thinking about how they did it. Slaughter, genocide, murder, rape, kill, we don't even need to go through the list, right? But they are still very, very proud.
Right.
I cannot be proud of that. Not only because I was a victim of it historically, but also because other groups were victims of it. And we're still victims of it. Right? And we can get off the murder statistics. We can talk about how much more African Americans pay for vehicles, how much more they pay in interest fees. My dad, there's a classic episode on 60 Minutes in the 80s where a black woman who was, I can't remember what her role was, but she had some sort of business or finance background. She found out that she was paying more in her interest rate to one of the Chinese automakers than was quoted to her. And there was a big to-do about that. It even came out on 60 Minutes, right? So not only is it here, but it's elsewhere when we talked about in the prior episode about perception in episode 2, right? It's how does that impact how we take... So there's no way that I feel American other than the fact that I'm here.
I'm going to agree with you on pretty much everything you said because I felt the same way growing up. I felt more Iranian than I did American, even though I don't really feel Iranian because I was born and raised here.
Correct.
There's so much that I can't relate to. Like when I went to Iran, I felt my heart was there. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
But I just was so unfamiliar with it.
Correct.
Right? It was only my second time ever going. Shopping was uncomfortable. Everything was... I didn't have my own currency. Like, I didn't have my own card. Like, so... finally towards the end of it, I downloaded Snap, which is like their Uber on my phone. And I'm like, I'm going to learn how to use this app, even though it's in Farsi. I'm going to figure it out. And I don't know anything about the city. It's so big. Right. But anyhow, like, I can honestly say I never felt American until recently.
Oh, please enlighten me.
So I feel like with our current president and our current climate, I think everyone was all of a sudden I feel like everyone kind of woke up. Not everyone.
I was going to say, please define everyone.
Yeah. Not everyone. Clearly not everyone. But so many people were so thrown, like, it was like they were blindsided that he could even win.
Yeah.
With all the stuff he was saying.
Right.
And for me, it was like, welcome to my world.
It's nothing new.
I was like, this is nothing new.
Yeah.
This is, if you've been paying any attention, and if you ever paid attention in history or in life in general, to your own thoughts, and I'll be honest, a lot of my enlightenment has come from my own thoughts. Right. Like my own prejudices. And things like that. So listen to your own thoughts and you'll be like, yeah, that's just real. Like it's still here. Right. So I feel like that was the first time I ever started to feel like I belong here.
Now, is that because you got, let's dig into that more. Is that because you received feedback from other folks? Like what made you feel that way other than the election?
What made me feel that way was that I no longer felt like I was this outsider, right? Because I'm not Black, right? So for me to be aware of and not from firsthand experience necessarily, but for me to empathize and be aware of the challenges that the Black community or Latino community or other communities go through. I'm still an outsider. I'm not Black. I'm not Latina. I'm not Asian. Like, I can empathize and I can speak for you. I can advocate. I can be your ally, but I'm not you.
Right. Same way I'm not a woman. Right?
Exactly. So for the first time, I felt like not everyone, a representation from every group is feeling this sense of, disgust with the things that have become acceptable, the lack of character, the lack of integrity, the lack of morality, the lack of humanity, lack of common courtesy, and just human decency, like basic human decency.
Yeah.
I think I just kind of felt like people all around me were starting to get it.
Yeah.
And to see like, okay, America is not as progressed as we thought it was.
No.
Or that we try to pretend like we are. Right? Like even when I was talking about my family that was visiting, you know, they were like, America is the only country where you can have immigrants come and thrive. And I was like, Canada.
Yeah.
I was like, the beautiful thing about Canada, the few times that I've been there, was that the sense that I got there was that I could be Iranian and Canadian.
Right. Oh,
right?
interesting.
Like
the
people I knew there, they can be wherever they're from and are still considered Canadian.
I don't feel like that's how it is.
Not at all.
You can't have. There's no such thing as dual.
There is.
Well, let me not say no such thing.
Say it.
I
don't believe it.
I will draw this distinction. Now, I'm going to only speak about this group because I know a couple of people that are descendants of, right? And I don't have experience there. But think about St. Patrick's Day, though.
Okay.
People love on that day to say, oh, I'm of Irish descent. And they got a whole day, right? Yeah. They're still celebrated. So I think sometimes depending on the community from which you're from, that there is some more acceptance, but obviously, you know, Irish, Celtic, whatever, like still white, right? The same.
Yeah,
back to talking about the whole immigration conversation, and how come we can't get more immigrants from Norway, right? Like it's clear, right? It's clear that there's a preference, but to your point, I definitely understand how you feel. I can't say that I feel the same way, but moments where if you talk to different folks where they do say American and people start to get this, oh, I want to put my arm around you, is if you're in a foreign country. Yeah. So when I visited places in Mexico and there have been other tourists there that were white, it's we now are American because we are on foreign soil.
So we gotta be.
But I doubt that would be the case if I was in that person's neighborhood back in the States, unless we're talking about football or something else at a bar, right? That's when you'll see, like, it's very interesting, the social dynamic that goes along with feeling like you're from someplace is recognizing a similar culture, right, or a similar land. Yeah. And so when in this country, it's like, oh, if I go to a sports bar and everybody's rah, 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 then it kind of doesn't matter. It goes out the window because we're rooting for, you know, the Chiefs or the Raiders or the Patriots or whomever, right? So there's that camaraderie there. But if you take sports out of it for guys and you take alcohol out of it, right? Or you take we're in a different country, but we all happen to be from the same place out of it, then it becomes different. At least in my experience.
So I feel like this is where your butcher comes out.
Yeah. Can you please tell what's the butcher?
So the butcher is somebody who is very strong in their view of what it is that they believe and their perception of how things are. In a very biased way, kind of swinging and hacking and less focused on precision.
True.
And I'm going to be the baker in this one.
All right.
And the baker is someone who's very detailed and measured and, you know, kind of, I'm going to approach it with concern and kind of be exact.
I appreciate that. So listeners, you will hear this theme come up, and it's something that we talked about even as we were creating the show is sometimes when you talk about cultures, there's different personas, right? Our experience shapes a lot of what we do. The conversations we have with other folks shape a lot of how we think. But there definitely are those things that we hold tried and true to, like no matter what, like this is how I feel. So I appreciate you calling me out on being a butcher. And I'm sure other people who know me will say, yeah, Ollie, yeah, you can be a butcher a little bit sometimes.
We all have our moments. But I want to say, you said about, you know, if you were in Mexico and then you're with a white couple or whatever, and then all of a sudden we're American, but if you were back in their neighborhood, chances are they wouldn't even embrace you that way.
I don't know that they would. Like, maybe not. Maybe I can I will backtrack from chances, but I would be a lot more skeptical. I'm a lot more confident going to Mexico and hanging out with a group of white guys and being accepted because we're at a resort in Cancun than I am going to a get together in their neighborhood.
Why
where they don't.
If you're invited, why do you feel that way? right? It's not
well, if I'm okay, so you're right. Let's make a distinction.
It's like, why would you be versus Barney,
so
whatever color they are?
Let's be the baker, right? Let's use more precision.
Okay.
I've traveled to Mexico, right, as a tourist with me and let's say my lady friend, right? So we go together, we're having a good time. We meet another white couple that we do not know in that area, at that resort, right? And we're talking about, we just, alcohol's involved. We started having general conversation. And this actually happened to me once.
Yeah.
Where we started talking about politics and the upcoming election. Not the recent one. This was, 7-8 years ago. Okay. Having general conversation about stuff. And there's a very accepting sort of environment. Like, oh, where are you from? Oh, from the Bay Area. Oh, okay. That's great. I grew up here. I'm from here. So there's that regional geographical sort of connection because it's all within the United States. Okay. Right. And we're here in Mexico at a resort that you can't just walk in off the street from. Right?
Sure,
For example.
And you're spending most of your time at that resort.
And you're spending most of your time at that resort.
You're going to probably see them again.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll see them again. Obviously, you paid some kind of money to get in here because it's not cheap. So, cool.
Yeah.
Now, come back to the States, same sort of dynamic at some other place, right? If it's a restaurant or whatever, a friend of mine, for example, went into a place in New Jersey that is very heavily Caucasian in the demographic. Okay. When he walked into this restaurant with his wife, with his 2 kids, and
they're all black.
Everyone's black. He is in the C-suite at a cosmetic company, a large multinational cosmetic company, mind you. And kids are brilliant kids, brilliant, beautiful wife. He said everyone looked at them as though they shouldn't have been there. Right? So that's what I'm honing in on. I'm not saying it's like that everywhere, but I'm saying when you go someplace else foreign and you speak and you clearly have an American accent. I don't even want to say English, right? Because that's a different accent. But if you have an American accent, there's an instinctual like, oh, you're from the States, blah, 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 blah. But if I'm in the States and I go someplace where they may not expect to see, because I'm sure they may not expect to see me at this resort.
Right.
But if I go someplace else here where they may not expect to see me, you get eyes.
You get eyes.
At least that's my experience. I'm not saying everybody does, but
sure.
In this area, he was like, they definitely don't see a lot of us. And we walked in there, we definitely knew they don't see a lot of us. Yeah. Just by the looks that we got. But that's probably not the look that he would have got at a resort in Mexico or a resort elsewhere.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Because it could have just been a look of, oh.
They're real.
They're real. And I didn't realize that we didn't have that many around here, and I'm surprised that I'm surprised. I'm surprised that I'm surprised they're here.
You've only been here for 400 years, but whatever.
Well, I mean, in specific neighborhoods, or if I go, for example, I teach dance at a Persian school.
Correct.
Okay, so when a black man walked in,
true, fair,
right? Fair, I was like, oh, okay,
right.
It was like, okay, or when a very white man or white woman walks in, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not surprised, but it's just, oh, I'm thrown aback for a second. And it's like, okay.
You are thrown aback. The thoughts after that are what make the distinction.
I agree.
Right? It's not the startle, it's the acceptance or lack thereof. Right. Or, acceptance or being tolerant, because that word used to be, oh, we tolerate. I don't want to be tolerated. I didn't ask to be here. Like if you really want to go back, right? But part of it is what is the thought behind?
I was going to say something mean. I was going to say, well, that's your parents' fault. You can't blame that on slavery,
right? Right, my number one card, right?
I'm sorry. I have my butcher moments too. So no offense to any butchers out there.
Yeah, no offense to butchers. That's definitely how I operate some days. So back to the idea of being American, that's where it's interesting what you said in that I'm very much like, well, I still don't feel that way. And you're saying because of the political climate, people were kind of tapped on the shoulder to a bit to say, hey, you know what? Not only is someone in a leadership position saying these things, but they're also going to these rallies, and there are a lot of people out there that are rah, 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 yes, 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 punch them in the face.
Oh my God.
Send them back, right? Like,
grab them.
Right. And it's funny because I had someone, a Caucasian woman, white lady, who is originally from the Bay Area, say to me one day, she's like, well, I don't know how this happened. Like, she said, how is Florida a red state? And I'm like, well, because you've only been to Disney World.
Well,
and you've been no place outside. Because I think people sometimes get surprised, and I'm like, let's be real about integration and social centers and different ideas. From a cultural perspective, your ideas come a lot of times from your experience and your education. So we know education is not going to take care of it. We already know that, right? Black history, Iranian, let's be clear, education is not going to do it.
Right.
But if you see a black man on a daily basis who's smart, funny, educated, charming, yes, I'm talking about myself, then
indeed.
and express those ideas and learn a little bit about his family's history. The same thing with a black woman, the same thing with Iranian. It will change your perspective. But if that is not the demographic you grow up in, if that's not the area you grew up in, and you are insulated culturally,
that's going to happen.
This is what happens, right?
So I want to kind of piggyback on what you said earlier about how you don't feel like you created this country. You didn't build this country, so you don't feel like...
Physically, we built it, but...
No. Not you. I'm just kidding. But no, I know what you meant. But I think one of the other reasons I feel more charged and more empowered and more American, or what I want to believe is what America is supposed to be, is because so many different people have now been running for government offices.
True. Very
right?
true. Yeah.
So it's like we are building this country. Now is our time where we are building this country.
So let me ask you this. Why are they running? Right?
Why are they running?
To me, the catalyst feels obvious.
Okay.
Right. I think that, so what I mean by that is I think that if we go before Obama and years before that, I think people were interested and they kind of knocked at the door like there needs to be more diversity. We need more representation. But I think in this case, but I think there's some fact based in the statement. When the pendulum swings so hard in the opposite direction and you've been walking forward, albeit very slowly, and something happens to where you literally trip and fall and roll like 15, 20 feet backwards.
Like chutes and ladders, all of a sudden you go down that
you go down and you're just like,
that sliding.
Then there is that impetus and that rising from people that's like, time out. There's no way in hell we're going to go back 10 feet with this. Oh, hell no. Right? So now there's this momentous sort of outcry from folks from every walk of life to say this needs to be corrected. Let's have this extreme push for correction. I'll never say overcorrection because it's not even the way it's supposed to be, but this strong push for correction and advancement. Sure. Right. And I don't know that this happens if Obama's president and then Joe Biden was.
I don't know.
Right. Which your standard sort of like,
it would have. I don't.
Without people yelling in the streets to say, you know what I mean? Yeah. Go back. Let's shut down the borders.
No, I don't think it would have.
Let's build a wall.
The neo-Nazis rising and all of these
Let's build a wall in Colorado.
Have you seen the shirts like that some people made in Aspen or in Vail, where there was like, make Vail great again, build a wall around Aspen?
No, I had. Oh, that's hilarious.
It's brilliant.
I've not seen that.
But, I just feel like that whole revolutionary spirit, I feel like that is American.
Okay.
Now, maybe in the past it was driven by different things like greed or power. Whereas I think right now this revolutionary spirit where we're like, oh, hell no, we've had enough, we're done, is driven by, for the most part, people's humanity. Because what are we asking for? We're asking for us to have, basic living needs met. So, someone who is working a full-time job, should be able to afford a place to live.
True.
Right? People should have access to healthcare.
100%.
Right? People should not be so in debt just to get an education.
Right.
Right? Like, why are we one of the few countries in the world that doesn't offer free education? Right? Or even at a lower cost. Why is our society driven on greed? Right? Like, the profit. And then we justify it. It's okay. Well, that's business.
Yeah, capitalism.
That's business.
In democracy, you elected your officials, you elected the system,
right,
etc.
What about humanity? Like, we just kind of dismissed humanity for money.
It's one thing I find hard is that, and one thing that we see too very clearly is that, and maybe it's part of the reason why I feel butcherish when it comes to being American, is I don't have the same viewpoint of saying, well, let's just take the definition of American and change what it means. Mm-hmm. Change is slow. Thought process is slow. So when you ask a question of why are we focused on greed and where's the humanity? Well, how was the country built? Right?
No, I agree.
You know what I mean?
No.
And I know,
totally with you on the foundation how we got here.
And I know that you know that.
Yeah.
But when you're tied to that, it sometimes, at least for me, and I know for other people, this is not necessarily the case, and I do not speak for all Black folks. Mm-hmm. It's hard sometimes to get past the idea of like, this is how things were, and people say, well, the intent, and this is what America's supposed to be. Right. Sometimes I struggle with, well, who defines what it's supposed to be? Is it the current generation, or is it the people that built it and the systems that are put in place to keep it a certain way? Even if those systems get overrun over time. Right. Like, where do I look in there and say, well, oh, this is where I fit in being American? You know what I mean? Like, right. And that's why we wanted to touch on the patriotism piece of, and I'm not going to get into the whole dealing thing because I know people are just like, oh, Colin Kaepernick. But to stand and be proud of a place means you also have to accept that place's history. It's hard to say,
that's okay.
Well, I'm proud from 1965 when segregation was over up until, or I'm proud for, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm proud from 2020.
right. I'm proud from Obama's election until, right? And just for those 8 years, and now I'm no longer proud.
2015, and then 2016, and then after that, it's all downhill.
Right, yeah.
And then I'm proud again.
And then I'm proud again.
Yeah. No, I think for patriotism, I'm not a patriot.
Yeah. Me neither.
Growing up, I was an Iranian patriot for sure. It was just, patriotism is huge in Iran, even with the current government. There's something about being Iranian where we say like hamvatan, like our homeland, like there's just something about it where they can hate the government as much as they want, but at the end of the day, if they have to fight for their country, they will. They will, absolutely. Without a doubt, 99% of the time, everyone will be like, no, I will fight for my country. Yeah. You don't have that here because we don't feel like it's our country. Right. So I feel like patriotism in the United States, until we rebrand what it means to be American, and it's not that you have to embrace with loving arms the history of our country. I'm speaking about America. You have to acknowledge it. Correct. Right. 100%. And how do you restore integrity? Like when you acknowledge it and you try to make right by it. True. Right. Like, so we're going to have to funnel and create a lot of programs to help develop these communities, that the ghettos, the projects, to help gentrify them for themselves, right? Like help bring it up, but with them still being there, not driving them out, and saying, or with Native Americans, and I think Canada is trying to do that, like acknowledging the First Nation folks and acknowledging the atrocities. I think it was a huge battle for First Nation people to even get that far, and I think they still have a long way to go. Yeah. But I think they're doing a better job at it than we are here in the United States. Oh, of course, we this country hides its history. It does not like to own up to how it was. We're narcissistic. We're a country of narcissists.
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, we're setting the tone for the world.
Unfortunately.
Right? And a lot of people have embraced it.
Yeah.
But I do think that now is a time for a rebrand.
100%.
Right? And can we acknowledge our atrocious history and rebuild from here? Absolutely. We can, because, you know, we have to learn. Any failure, we have to learn from. And as a world leader, we have to be better. We have to be better. I just don't feel like there's any other choice. Yeah. We have to be. And, you know, with us not being into politics, like wanting to run for politics, we start a podcast.
Right. right.
Let's talk.
And I agree with you. I'm going to take a butcherish stance real quick and just say,
because that's always fun.
That's always fun. The time for the rebrand was hundreds of years ago, but sometimes I see you rolling your eyes. So,
oh God. Yeah, of course it was 100 years ago.
We'll go with the now is better than ever.
Well, that's all we can do. You can't change the past, right? Like, I can't.
Yeah, I'm clearly being butcherish on that.
Absolutely.
And for the
do I hate slavery? Absolutely. Do I hate that women are oppressed? Absolutely. Do I hate that we've annihilated the Native American community? Absolutely. Can I do anything about it? Can I change the past?
Change the past, no. But you can change and educate for the future. Absolutely. Right. And to your point, I agree with you about the program piece of it. And I'm definitely a proponent of education changes ideas. Mm-hmm. And when you do it at a foundational level, when you start to tell the truth at the beginning, instead of people saying, well, I'm 40 years old before I learned how a slave ship was packed. Mm-hmm. Right? Like before people learn, like, oh, well, who did design Washington, D.C.? Oh, it was a black man. I had no idea. Right? Because I'll learn all those things about the dominant culture in school. But if you start at a young age and educate and you truly diversify culture and experience and exposure, you don't have to worry about that when you're 30. If I grow up around Asians, whites, Filipinos, Cambodians, Indians, and every other group, from the time I'm in kindergarten, right up through primary school, I don't turn into a 40-year-old man that thinks that, you know, all Filipinos do is smoke cigarettes and drink. Like, you know what I mean? Right, like, because I was exposed to that at a young age, or I was taught something different that, oh, here are intelligent folks from every walk of life in every community. Right. Right. And then it's harder to reinforce silly stereotypes down the line if that was never my experience growing up. Right. Right. And I think, to your point, we all, in things we've talked about offline, we all do better together when we're honest, when we're open, and we strive to be a better community, a better person. For everyone. For everyone. Right. For everyone.
I agree. And that's kind of why I think I don't like patriotism. I think it's fine to be proud of your heritage and proud of where you're from. But I just feel like in such a global world, we just need to be better human beings. Right. Like, it shouldn't matter where you're from. Like, it's okay to have that. Like, if you're German and you want to wear your lederhosen and go to Oktoberfest, by all means. Right. Do that. Or any other holidays or celebrations that, you know, you have in your culture and community. That's awesome. Great. Like, I'm Iranian. We celebrate Nowruz. We celebrate Yalda. We have all kinds of things, and I love it, and that's fine. But I just feel like humanity has to trump patriotism. 100%. Humanity has to trump capitalism. And until that shift really happens, we're on a really downward trajectory to just kind of keep getting worse and worse and worse as a world. Yeah. Because we all want the same things. 100%. Right?
Yeah, we do.
You know, and at what point do you say enough is enough? Yeah. Like, how many rooms do I actually need? How many pairs of shoes? My mom used to always laugh at me. She's like, you have 2 feet and 100 pair of shoes. I don't, but that's what it looks like to her. But I just laugh, and I think about that today as someone who, you know, is conscious about what's happening in the environment and all the waste. Mm-hmm. It's not just how many pairs of shoes do I need in a vanity sense or in a money frugal type sense and just being conscious, monetary, financially conscious, but also an environmentally conscious person. Like, how many pairs of shoes do I really need?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what happens to the shoes when I'm done and they're no longer wearable? Where do they go? Right? So it's kind of like being more of a environmentally conscious person. Like, even when I moved into this house, I haven't, at first I was like, I'm going to buy everything new, I'm going to do this. And then as I started going through stuff, I'm like, well, this is still usable. It's just a little dirty. I just need to wash it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, do I really want to just throw this away or give it to Salvation Army thinking that it's knowing darn well it's going to end up in a trash somewhere.
Yeah.
But I just think that, humanity absolutely has to come before anything.
True
else.
Global citizenship, not just culturally, but for the earth too, to your point. And I definitely agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah. And with that, on that note, we're not so different. If you liked what you heard, or you have some feedback or questions or comments or ideas, please feel free to email us at wnsdifferent@gmail.com. So that's we're not so different, wnsdifferent@gmail.com. See you on the next one.